Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back today with one of our favorite guests, Dr. Michael W. Fawkes. How you doing, Doc Fawkes?
Good, all things considered.
Dr. Fawkes has got his website, Dr. Fawkes One Health. He is a veterinarian, a longtime animal rights activist. He's done so much for every living creature. And today is Guy Fawkes Day. And we're celebrating by having our own little mini revolution here, by having a little talk.
Yes, indeed. And I'll put my mask on in commemoration of Guy Fawkes Day. Hello there. Guy Fawkes, November the 5th, gunpowder, treason, and plot.
Never.
In 1605 in London, that a group of Catholic zealots tried to blow up the Houses of Commons, and they were caught. And Guy Fawkes was thrown into the Tower of London, tortured, and then publicly killed. And King James I declared November 5th a day of remembrance because miraculously they were all saved from these extremists. But who were the extremists when the British rulers were oppressing Catholics? You know, we want freedom for all. Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, but that was simply not done. So still today, children go around and make effigies of Guy Fawkes. And tonight, across England especially, they'll be burning bonfires and his effigy, not really understanding what the hell is going on. But
Yeah.
it's good fun.
Yeah. There's some revolutionary spirit behind it, but we don't quite remember what it was.
That's right. Venting, undirected venting anger, makes you feel good, but it doesn't change things really.
Yeah. The essence of the angry mob. It has no idea where it's going or why it's chanting, but it's got its torches and pitchforks. So, well, the religious thing, that brings us to, when we talk about Catholics, we talk about pro-life, and we talk about kind of, there's a hypocrisy behind that, and you kind of have written on that recently. What do you think is the paradox behind the pro-life argument?
Well, there are various attitudes of pro-life. A prevailing one is tied in with the whole anti-abortion movement. But to be exclusively pro-human life, when we have increasing poverty and a rising human population of over 7 billion now that is destroying the planet, we have to broaden our attitude. And a good example of misplaced pro-life is the pro-life attitude of some people toward cats. Many animal shelters in the US and other countries, when they can't find enough homes for the cats, instead of building large communal enclosures for them, simply set them free. They neuter them, might give them a rabies vaccination that only lasts about a year, and then they release them to fend for themselves, committing them basically to a life of suffering, slow death. They have to kill to get their own food, so there's an impact on wildlife. And it's a totally misplaced pro-life attitude towards cats. You have to think of all the consequences. So the pro-life, human-centered attitude, or one particular species, needs to be expanded to a pro-life attitude in a much broader framework where we examine our legacy, the legacy of pesticides that has decimated the planet, the legacy of antibiotics and now resistant strains of antibiotics, antibios, think of the word, that's anti-life, but we've done it for our own benefit. Farmers do it for their money benefit because it's a growth stimulant. It makes the animals more productive. And there's evidence now that the antibiotics are can act as obesogens, so we wonder why people are becoming so fat. But they destroy some of the good bacteria in our guts, and we've got to take care of our little microbiome in our guts. And that's the next wave of realization, that if we take care of the bacteria in the soil, we have more nutritious and healthier crops. If we feed ourselves well, we have a healthy intestinal microflora, which this is why I urge people to look at what they're eating, because if you can restore a healthy gut microbiome, you'll have less depression, less obesity problems. Some of the bacteria produce serotonin, which make you feel good. And they're an essential part of our immune system as well. It's very complicated. There's a gut-brain connection. And those are the little organisms. So I'm very pro-life at every level.
That's good. And so that's important. The microbiome especially is something we're just as humans understanding. What are some of the things that are putting our microbiome in harm's way specifically? Is it the pesticides, or what is it?
It's especially herbicides. I blew the whistle years ago on Monsanto's glyphosate. Herbicides, they will kill all kinds of microorganisms, and they deplete the soil. And when we have herbicide residues in our food, especially when the crops are sprayed, there's a residue in the wheat. And some of the genetically engineered crops have been engineered to be resistant to Roundup herbicide, which is corn and soy and a lot of sugar beet. The residues are in there because they spray the crops to control the weeds, and the crops absorb the glyphosate. And it affects our brains, it affects our guts. And it's like putting weed killer in our guts that kill a lot of the beneficial bacteria that we need. It is so bloody stupid that it's profitable.
But it's profitable. That's the important point, I guess.
Yes.
And so we're going to continue to have issues if we don't start thinking about the world as, the biodiversity everybody's always chanting. It's not just a trend. It's a real concept. And so when they release stuff like cats into the wild, you're basically feeding the wildlife, or it's humans trying to imprint and change and manipulate natural systems again. And that's once again throwing it all off kilter, yeah?
Yes, that all things are connected, and we must think of all the connections. This calls for two things in my bag. One is sound science, and the other is bioethics, a strong ethical template. And that was one of my recent books, Bringing Life to Ethics, Global Bioethics for a Humane Society. And I think in addition to sound science, bioethics, we need empathy as well. That emotional connection. And I think we're suffering from an increasing empathy deficit disorder when we don't have feeling or knowledge for the plants and the animals that we're eating. A lot of old stuff saying when people used to sing to their crops, they would be more bountiful. And there's a lot of evidence that this is true. It's certainly evidence, and Paul Helmsworth, an Australian animal scientist, showed that pig farmers who have a social, emotional relationship with their pigs, the pigs are healthier and more productive. So you think of these huge factories where the animals are de-animalized. They call it mechanomorphization. They're just treated as objects. There's more stress, actually less productivity. But once we have the emotional connection in there, that can make a big difference.
And for all you meet...
I'd like to read a quote from this book.
Oh, please.
Can I hold this up?
There we go.
See that?
Dr. Michael Fawkes, Animals and Nature First.
Yes, this is my latest book, and this is a quote from an Australian Aboriginal elder from the Gagaju tribe in the Northwest Territories, Bill Meiji. I love this quote. He says, I feel it with my body, with my blood, feeling all these trees, all this country. When the winds blow, you can feel it. Same for country, you feel it. You can look, but feeling that make you. Feeling make you, and there is an open space. He is coming through your body. Look while you blow and feel with your body, because tree just about your brother and father, and tree is watching you. If you feel sore, headache, sore body, that means somebody killing tree or grass. You feel because your body in that tree or earth. Nobody can tell you. You got to feel it yourself. Now, that's an Australian Aboriginal, which Christians would probably say he's just a primitive savage. My God.
Right, a primitive savage. That's the philosophy that we have lost completely, that we used to have.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is it some kind of, it's the powers that be have a benefit in dividing us in this way and saying it's us versus them, and plants and animals, they're here for our pleasure and stuff like this. Do you find that to be a theory?
It's very common practice, and I think it was Pope Paul many years ago when he was speaking to German scientists in his papal encyclical or whatever they call it. He said, "It is certain that God created animals for man's use." And so I wrote to the Vatican and said, "Where in the Bible does this come from? You know, where does this paper?" And I eventually got a reply back.
Oh, really?
Saying that, you know, the Pope is infallible and this comes from a higher authority. But since then, the latest Pope Francis, with his encyclical Laudato Si, contains a lot of the animal rights and environmental ethics language that I and others were promoting in the 1980s and 1990s. He's really moving forward. And he speaks, the present Pope speaks of the tyranny of anthropocentrism.
Okay.
Yep. So he's hitting the nail on the head, which a lot of people don't like because it interferes with corporate interests and profits and everything else. So,
of course. Well, at least better late than never when it comes to, you know, seeing the big picture. So, and
I know. Well, you know, I write a weekly syndicated newspaper column, Animal Doctor, here in the U.S. And some people write in saying, you know, you provide some wonderful advice for our animal companions, but you also share some of the horrible things that are happening to animals, wild and domesticated around the world, and what's happening to the environment. You know, we feel despair and helpless. You know, what can we do? And a lot of people don't listen to the news anymore. They're just sick of hearing everything negative, negative, negative. So they move themselves into a little bubble. What I say is get out of your bubbles and look at your lifestyles. Look at what you're eating. Why, if you have the money, why go on that cruise, which is just a floating toilet? Why not give the money to a local conservation group or your animal shelter? Become a volunteer to help. There are so many things that we can do to get out of our own sense of helplessness and despair.
Yeah. And being uncomfortable is actually the best thing you can do in order to stay constantly motivated in remembering to do the right thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's why I watch Animal Cruelty every week. I'll sit down and I'll just look at it all and just remember why we're doing what we're doing and when to make that sacrifice. And
yeah, there's a very good website called Sentient Media. I would recommend Sentient Media for a lot of people who want information. They cover various issues, factory farming, trapping, you name it.
Yeah.
And of course, part of my pro-life philosophy, we mentioned antibiotics and pesticides causing so much harm. The other terrible harms that we've done around the world is killing off all the predators. And here in Minnesota, we're still pushing backwards and forwards with the deer hunters wanting to have an open season to shoot the wolves, but other areas. And just reported today was a mountain lion, a young male mountain lion, has moved over from the west into Minnesota. So we need to protect the predators because they keep the ecosystems in balance, the prey, stop overabundance of white-tailed deer, and so on. But the hunters want all the deer for themselves, and the cattle ranchers want to keep producing cattle and kill the wolves by whatever means. Mm-hmm. And we need to back off.
How much truth is there to the idea that hunters play a role in conservation when it comes to numbers of certain animals? And do they do a good job, or are they even necessary?
Well, they are necessary at this time. It's a little bit like Guy Fawkes and the Catholics.
Yeah.
They have the hunters' zealots. One group of hunting zealots, I think from Colorado, forced the state of Wisconsin to open the wolf hunt prematurely, which is just obscene. No, I don't believe that the judge rolled over, but they filed an effective injunction to get the wolf season opened prematurely. But there are other hunting groups like Ducks Unlimited that have had a positive effect protecting wetlands and convincing farmers not to drain the wetlands, to preserve them for the wildlife, for the ducks and so on, rather than draining the wetlands to produce more corn and soybean to feed pigs so that we can have more heart attacks and so that we can send corn and soybeans to China where they desperately need to eat pig for some godforsaken reason.
Right.
National diet.
Keeping in mind that China has existed for a long time only eating rice, and it's only now that they're getting a taste of beef. And then once they do, it's game over for humanity.
It is difficult, but China, a lot of these Asian countries now are deeply involved in deep water fishing, and they will have a huge fish processing ship, and all little boats go around trawling and essentially emptying the seas, which impoverishes the local coastal villages, even around the Galapagos. These huge Chinese fish factories are operating. They go into the near the southern Arctic areas and harvest krill for the krill oil. And I tell people, if you want a supplement, don't get krill oil. That the krill is mainly used to feed livestock as a protein source. And it's a staple diet for whales and other marine life. So, we're competing at every level. So we must shift backwards and backwards and backwards and see the wisdom for 7 billion of us to become vegan. Stop this carnage.
And the techniques that they're using too are quite wasteful. They're scooping up, big piles of different kinds of sea creatures, and then basically killing a few, and then keeping maybe the lobsters or keeping the shrimp.
Yes, a lot of the bycatch they will feed to farm salmon and farm shrimp, and the farm salmon, they're all overcrowded and stressed. Farm salmon is not a health food. It's probably a hazardous food because at the food chain there's concentration of dioxins. So they're probably pretty toxic.
Wow. And
they're covered in insecticides to control sea lice, which is a major problem. And then they pour the chemicals on them. Then there's a question of how can they be killed humanely? But the shrimp industry is just frightful. They've destroyed all the mangrove swamps around Southeast Asia. And that's essential for the marine ecosystem to be viable, is to maintain the mangrove forests or swamps. That's where the little fish hide and have their eggs and breed and so on. And they cut all that down for shrimp farming. And to control diseases in the shrimp, they poured antibiotics on them ad nauseum. And now the scientists have found several strains of bacteria now are resistant to a whole variety of antibiotics. And we've been doing the same thing with pigs and poultry and cattle, putting antibiotics in the feed because it stimulates growth as well as control disease. And in us, the antibiotics, there's evidence that they contribute to obesity and foul everything else up. It's so silly.
And we've been using the antibiotics and chemicals and everything that we've invented in the chemistry lab for the last 200 years, just using it kind of willy-nilly on every living creature and surface of the planet.
Yep, and we have such fear now. Of fleas, for example. Now, fleas can transmit disease, but there's an absolute paranoia that our dog or cat might get fleas, so people are putting these spot-on insecticides on their cats and dogs. Now, all cats should be kept indoors. They shouldn't be allowed to come and go indoor-outdoor cats because they can pick up diseases and bring them back. But then they might bring fleas in, and fleas can transmit plague and things like that. And again, I think it was in the 1400s, one of the popes declared war against cats, especially black cats, because he thought that they caused the plague. And this is the problem with Halloween, that still black cats get tortured, and black cats have the lowest adoption rate in animal shelters in most countries because they're considered bad luck. But back to the fleas. So vets and over-the-counter sales of these spot-on insecticides are very, very dangerous for the animals. They can suppress the immune system. They can cause seizures. And the best methods of flea control are posted on my website, drfox1health.com. Avoid using these spot-ons especially, and the oral ones, the oral pills as well. A lot of dogs have had serious seizures and have been permanently impaired by these widely promoted insecticides. You know,
I wonder.
Some of them are neonicotinoids.
Okay.
And the neonicotinoids are killing the pollinators and all the other insects. And there's a raging debate going on now, at least in the British veterinary community. There's hardly a tweak here in the American veterinary community. But big concern in the UK about dogs with these spot-on insecticides jumping into a stream or a pond, and just one little dose can wipe out half the life. One treated seed with neonicotinoid will kill a small bird like a chickadee. Just one treated seed. It takes so little. These are such potent.
Now, this has a chemistry background of nicotine, does it not?
Yes, exactly. And it affects the nervous system. It causes hyperpolarization, and it paralyzes the insects, and they die. And you get enough dose going into a small dog, and it affects the nervous system, and they'll have a seizure.
So everybody out there, imagine what it must feel like to have a dog eat a pack of cigarettes, and how much chemicals are in there, and how much, what happens if you smoke a cigarette. For people that smoke, it's attacks your nervous system. Imagine smoking 600 cigarettes all at once in your dog. It's not good. Exactly. And so you're saying you have alternative flea medication. Don't just go and find the first thing at the store for your pet or your animal companions to have. Look, what are some of the alternatives that we could?
First thing is to get a flea comb, a very fine comb, and just check your animal daily. If you've been out walking your dog, keep your cat indoors, no problem. You can use various repellents. Lemon eucalyptus will keep fleas and biting insects off and ticks. A lot of these products are sold to kill ticks. Okay? But they only kill the tick when the tick has taken the blood from the dog that is containing the insecticide, if it's been given orally. So you've got that time lapse with the tick attaching and transmitting possibly Lyme disease to the dog or some other disease. The same with the flea. A lot of dogs get flea bite allergy. They get so-called hotspots. And these drugs are not really going to have much of a difference because the flea is going to get a meal before it dies anyway. So it's all very silly. But the manufacturers will say, well, it does eventually reduce the population of the fleas and the ticks. But of course, you have to use so much in a coordinated community effort. It's just madness.
This is just advertising.
Yes. And vets hardly raise a squeak about it. And I get letters all the time. Dealing with one fellow in Belgium whose Cocker Spaniel puppy was put on one of these products and started having grand mal seizures. And he took it to the specialist at the Veterinary College, University of Ghent, how do you pronounce it?
Yeah.
And they took them forever to accept that it was the insecticide that the dog was given. They were thinking it was something else.
But the corporate scientists say that it's fine.
Oh, yes, you look through the small print, but some are now saying certain breeds might get seizures and be careful. So, but it's just, again, it's just insane.
Yeah, this is, again, what we like to talk about in the show is corporate malfeasance in the form of profits over people. And it seems to be not just for our animal companions, but for us and for every industry you can name. This is going to happen.
Well, a good story is with Monsanto's genetically engineered bovine growth hormone. And I testified before the U.S. government saying that this is bad for the cows. It's like giving them crack. It's going to overstimulate them to produce even more milk. And it was essentially a fait accompli. The U.S. government approved for Monsanto Posilac, the bovine growth hormone for dairy farmers to inject into their cows. Canadian government said no because of cow welfare concerns following my brief, and also revealed that two of their ministers had been bribed a couple of $1 million. They'd been offered bribes by the Monsanto lobbyists. That was a real blow-up. And Europe said no to it because the milk of the cows changed. It has more insulin growth factor in it, which could be a potential carcinogen. So we go round and around. And I discussed this with the chief liaison representative with the American Veterinary Medical Association. And I remember her saying, well, it might be an ethical issue or a welfare concern, but the market will be the final determinant. The market will be the final determinant.
And they would prefer if all regulations went away and they could go back to the Upton Sinclair days of feeding us newspaper, shredded newspaper in our meats and fillers and stuff like this.
So the marketeers. So we need to get back to our revolution.
I like you, Dr. Fawkes. You're a good man. Yeah. So, what about what's going on with salmonella in the raw pet foods and raw livestock? And there's been an increase in the UK recently of salmonella in pet food. What's going on there?
You're absolutely correct. A lot of pet food recalls here in the US are because of salmonella contamination, and it's mainly with the dry kibble. But that's been superheated, which destroys half the nutrients. So where's it coming from? And my theory there is that they called it animal digest, which you can imagine. It's kind of a slurry of animal leftovers that is sprayed on the kibble after it's been cooked and extruded and made into little pieces, just to add a little flavor, odor, allure for the dog or cat. And I think that's where the salmonella or the E. coli contamination is likely to come in the dry foods. But now we have the raw food feeding craze with a lot of veterinarians saying, raw food and bones and so on. And bones will kill dogs. You don't give them bones. And raw meats and poultry from factory farm sources is potentially hazardous, because I think 1 in every 3 chickens tested now test positive for salmonella and possibly E. coli. If you are going to prepare food for your dog and you don't want to take a vegan path, don't buy ground hamburger, because that can have the bacteria in there, and the meat can be from different sources. You don't know if it's come from Brazil on the end of the Amazon or from your local butcher. It's all mixed up in the processing of beef in the U.S.
Mystery meat.
Mystery meat, and I believe it's a similar situation in Europe too. You're not quite sure of the source, and country of origin labeling is very important. But buy solid pieces of meat rather than the ground, and handle with care because of the possible bacterial contamination.
So about the bones, I don't feed bones to my dog because it's a choking hazard, and also this, she'll get constipated probably, and it messes up her digestion. What are the reasons you don't do bones?
Bones can crack teeth. They can break into splinters and penetrate the guts, and that's a real emergency. There are safe rawhide chews, and now there's one company called Earth Animal that is producing a non-animal rawhide chew, all plant-based, which my dog really likes, and it's good to have something to chew on. If you are going for the rawhide route, make sure that it's not coming from India and has some indication, or China, and has some indication as to country of origin, because a lot of the rawhides have potentially harmful chemical residues in, like arsenic and cadmium.
So there's lots of examples of this. You actually went to India and lived there for a while. What was the story there? You never told me about how you got to India, and what's it like there?
I first went to India in the 70s to study the wild dogs in the jungle.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the dhole, or Asiatic wild dog. And then several years later, I went back there to give a talk to the Indian Animal Welfare National Conference, and my wife came along with me, and she saw some pretty horrendous things going on, especially the cattle drive, where the spent beasts of burden and the spent cows are driven hundreds of miles to slaughter, because slaughter is outlawed in several states. It's only allowed in Kerala and in West Bengal. So they either go by rail to these 2 states, or they go to collection areas in trucks, and then they're driven on the road by foot to slaughter. And she saw this going on and decided she had to go back and do something about it. And she set up an animal shelter with full veterinary services in Tamil Nadu, South India, in the Nilgiris, which is a recognized UNESCO Global Biosphere Reserve.
Oh, wow.
And it's still rich in wildlife. We have tigers, leopards, elephants, and of course the wild dogs that I studied in the 70s. And she was helping the tribals with their animals, keeping the village dogs healthy, spay, neuter, vaccination. and veterinarian, Indian veterinarian, whom we still support, who teaches the people animal husbandry, proper care of the calves and the goats and the other animals. So it's really been a win-win situation, because in helping the animals, you're helping the people. Some of the officials would say, why are you coming here and just helping doing things for the animals? Why didn't you help the people? But she showed that when you help the animals, healthier animals are more productive, healthier dogs, no risk to the village community, everything gets on, benefits the people, and ultimately the wildlife, because you don't want rabid dogs going off and fighting wild animals as well, such as the wild pigs and so on.
Yeah.
So she did some incredibly good work there for close to 10 years, and we have published a book that's mentioned on the website, India's Animals, Helping the Sacred and the Suffering. And there's a weird twist that I discovered in India, which is very sad. The dairy cow is especially regarded as being sacred. But when they're suffering, you can't put the cow to sleep, because that violates the principle of ahimsa. Ahimsa means not to harm. And if you engage in euthanasia, you're giving yourself spiritual demerits, because you're violating that principle. Mm. So in India, especially in relation to cattle, the cow, ahimsa, non-harming, trumps compassion. Compassion should come first, compassionate killing. Mm. And it's like our pro-life debate earlier. You know, a lot of people are opposed to euthanizing the terminally ill humans.
Yeah.
It's a similar attitude here. So let's not just knock the Indians. We get wrapped up here in this moralistic sentimentalism where non-harming should not trump compassionate killing has its place. So these poor cows are put into cow shelters, and often they just starve to death. We visited some cow shelters where they have these huge sacks that looks like it's full of grain for them, but it's just stuffed with newspaper and straw. It's just facade. Terrible. Hypocrisy.
Oh.
But we're all hypocrites one way or another.
And so at the idea of ahimsa, which is Sanskrit for harm no one, it has nothing to do with the idea of alleviating suffering by using violence or, let's say, euthanasia.
Yeah, exactly.
And we need to at least retain some logical, rational answers. Because if I'm in that position, I want to go. I don't want to linger. I just want to be put out of my misery, and I can respect that. So, is there examples of this in other places that you've been? Do you see hypocrisies in the way that people think? Have you, like in Spain, they do the bullfighting and stuff? Is that going to be something that's ever going to be put to rest?
Oh, I don't know. We're still waiting for at least one pope to come out and say, grow up, you silly people, and stop this barbaric ritual. But we still have in the backwaters here in the US and in Europe, illegal dog fights.
Oh, right.
And cockfights. Puerto Ricans have their cockfights. And North India, we still have bear baiting with dogs, and other countries, spectacles.
The Norwegians as well, they like to whale hunt. And I guess they killed a lot this year. They killed 500 this year.
Yes, it's hard to keep count with what some of these countries are doing. And the Norwegians do stand out as a fairly civilized people. Mm. But when it comes to some species like whales, they insist on their traditional whale hunting. Same with the Japanese, who still like their whale. And they're also killing... I believe bottlenose dolphins. No, it has to stop.
I can't imagine why you would need all that stuff when there's vegetarian alternatives to almost everything you can think of.
When I was in Point Barrow, Alaska, I met with one Inuit Eskimo hunter who had led the hunt and killed a bowhead whale and was offered a big piece of blubber. And he explained to me how this killing ritual essentially keeps the community together. And they are the stewards of the whale population. Rather like one Ojibwe Native American hunter here who explained how when he and his son killed a buffalo, they gave thanks to the buffalo and they will use everything. It's a very different attitude of the gatherer hunter peoples because it's not commercial. It is for subsistence living, and every part of the animal is used, the bones, the tendons, the skin, and so on. But flip that over to the trophy hunting and killing wolves and other wildlife, lions and whatever, to hang on the wall, or commercial whaling. Once you put the money stamp on it, it's no longer ethical or sustainable or culturally valid.
Yeah. And in the case of extremely wealthy people who are sociopathic, they go and just do it for fun so they can take a picture. And there was this really sad story recently. I saw the picture where a woman went out into the woods thinking that she was going to hunt wolves and ended up just killing somebody's husky puppy. And there's very grotesque pictures of it.
Oh, yes. That's a sad one. But ultimately, it all comes home to roost.
Right.
I've argued that, when we kill off the wolves, and then there are people out there with their traps who are trapping the red foxes and the bobcat for their fur. And it's all these animals that control the little rodents that carry Lyme disease. And so all the carnivores help keep ecosystems healthy. And when we have the wonderful thing about biodiversity is it helps contain and prevent the spread of pandemic diseases. And the coronavirus pandemic that we're facing today is a lesson that we're not really learning yet because we're just pushing more vaccines as it continues to mutate and mutate and mutate. That the lesson is we've got to give nature a break. We've got to stop exploiting animals. Virus came probably from those live wet markets in Wuhan. Another theory is that they were trying to develop a vaccine and they made a virus with gain of function, and there was a leak in biosecurity. But either way, it was derived from animals. And Ebola is another good example of a disease transmitted from wild animals because their habitats are being encroached on. So we need to back away.
Sounds like the worst problems we face as far as diseases all seem to be zoonotic in origin.
Exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. And I say it's anthropogenic that we cause the health problems because of our impaired relationships and lack of understanding with other species and how ecosystems really function.
Once again, ignorance and live in the Western, European, New Age, capitalist lifestyle.
Yes.
So,
well, I just heard on the news that this bastard Putin has been bombing areas in Ukraine, which is the last wildlife stronghold for the European lynx, bobcat, and wolf. So even wildlife are being imperiled by this maniac.
Yeah. And that's when I see bombs blowing up, I don't even think about the people anymore. I should, which, it's all one big picture, but I really wonder the animals, birds, they're just trying to enjoy their breakfast are now bombarded with bullets and bombs and stuff. And I think that's how rude.
Yes. And then these poor dogs that become homeless and they're scavenging for themselves.
Yeah.
It's a great shame. And probably in some areas eating dead bodies too.
Yeah. Well, what goes around comes around, goes around.
Yes.
So as far as eating, I encourage people to go vegan. You agree?
Absolutely. And it is a lightning path. An incredible lightness of being can come over you.
Yeah. I've had
and there are more and more choices in restaurants and in grocery stores as well. It's amazing.
Yeah. So, and a lot of people get worried about their diet. Where am I going to get my omega-3? I have to eat fish. We were talking beforehand. Where else can you get omega-3?
From primrose oil, from flaxseed oil, can be very good sources. From various nuts. And I'm chewing nuts all the time. And from blue-green algae. Marine algae. Blue-green algae will poison you.
Careful, folks, careful.
Yeah, or the red tide, another nasty.
Oh, red tide poisoning, yeah.
Yeah, but the marine algae, and one company called Nordic Naturals produces capsules. Another one is called Ovega, which is, again, that's what I have. They're marine algae. And other good oils from nuts, coconut oil is excellent, with some essential fatty acids in it. We get our proteins from beans and lentils, but always soak the beans and lentils overnight. Soak them really well, because you've got to get rid of lectins, glutens and gliadins, which can upset your guts and cause inflammatory gut conditions.
You also mentioned aflatoxins as well.
Well, that's a whole other story indeed. That especially the dry kibble. These pet food companies get a shipment in of corn or wheat, and it's contaminated with mold. And aflatoxin, there's also another one called vomitotoxin, and you just can't stop vomiting. These are mycotoxic mold poisons that can damage the liver and can cause cancer. And so it calls for vigilance for the pet food manufacturers to constantly test their products, because a lot of them are already being condemned for human consumption anyway, especially the meat that goes into a lot of pet foods. It's called 4D meat, which 4D means dead, diseased, dying, and debilitated when they finish up in the slaughterhouse. And they're condemned for human consumption and are rendered into pig feed and pet food.
This is only for convicts and circus animals.
Yes.
Jeez. Yeah. Wow.
But the aflatoxin is all too prevalent, and part of it is the harvesting problem. But now we're facing climate change with floods and droughts, so we're going to have to change our agriculture drastically. And I think part of that is cutting back from using millions of acres to raise feed for poultry, pigs, and cattle, which is not efficient, and raise nutritious foods for people. And years ago, I spoke, I think it was in Illinois, the National Pork Producers Council. And I said, vertical integration is a corporate takeover. Most of you in this room will be out of business. And Earl Butz, the Secretary of Agriculture, was saying, and get big or get out. And they couldn't get big enough, fast enough. I said, you're going to be out. But In the interim, plant some nut trees. You'll be producing more protein per acre when you get a good, healthy, diverse forest of nut trees growing than you will raising pigs. It'll be more ecologically sound. You'll be helping climate change and doing all kinds of good things.
Yeah.
Of course, they didn't do it.
No.
But now the nut business is improving and increasing, so I have a glimmer of hope there.
Well, everybody out there should know that you vote with your dollar, and if you want to see more sustainable practices, the market has to know that you're interested, and you got to go out there and buy as many nuts as you can. Stop buying meat.
and vote with your dollar. And as I say, you can hold up your fork, and I say, fork you. Because it's not what comes out of our mouth that makes a difference. It's what we choose to put into our mouths.
Well said. And here we are just running our mouths about life and philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Pay attention to what you put in your bodies, people. It does have an effect.
And read that pet food label and check my website out. Consider home cooking for your dog or cat and follow those companies that are using more organically certified ingredients. Don't try to turn your cat into a vegan. Cats are obligate carnivores, but science is progressing that there might be, in the not too distant future, full alternatives to animal fats and proteins that cats need in their diet. Dogs are already some well-formulated vegan diets available, and some are being commercially manufactured now. I would like to see more organic certification of those ingredients, but the science is there now to have healthy dogs. And most of their, most of their allergens that they get are chicken, beef, dairy products, and so on. So they're more likely to be allergic to animal products and have atopic dermatitis or diarrhea because they are intolerant to that. There's far more tolerance for vegetable and seed ingredients.
Well, I have a friend out there who has a dog with an ear infection right now, this really cute little pit bull named Sid, and they just can't seem to get rid of this ear infection. And the vet keeps giving him medication and stuff, and they just can't figure it out. I said, you might want to check the diet.
Check the diet, give fish oil if you can't get or you can't afford the marine algae. Mm-hmm. Try some flaxseed oil, and I would also recommend putting a little olive oil in the ear every day. It's antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, and anti-inflammatory. That's why the Greeks have come.
All right. That's great advice. And I'm sure they'll be happy to hear it.
Yeah. Well, until next time.
Yeah. Well, until next time. We'll have to do it again.
Yes.
Dr. Michael Fawkes from drfawkes1health.com. We'll links in the description where you can find his columns and his writings and his books that are for sale. This is an amazing human being who's really on top of the curve when it comes to living the right way.
Yes, and I do try to connect the dots. And when I started at vet school, I realized that my main task is to try to heal our relationships between humans and other species. And I thank you for having that sensitivity and sensibility as well.
Hopefully I'm just getting started. I want to save the world.
Yes. Well, we will together, Chris. We're all united. On with the revolution.
Yeah, on with the revolution. All right. Well, we'll say goodbye to everybody in TV land. Bye, everybody.
Sounds good.